Welcome to But What About Me, a career success podcast dedicated to giving a voice to underrepresented populations, or UPs, and helping each navigate their career to reach their highest potential. This podcast is brought to you by JenniferTardy.com. Hey everyone, I'm super excited that you're back for another episode of But What About Me? I'm your host, Jennifer Tardy, and today I'm super thrilled to bring to you an episode all about mastering networking like an introvert. And there's no better guest to guide us on this journey than Erich Kurschat, who, like me, happens to be a proud introvert. Now, I've gotten so many clients who said to me, networking just isn't my thing, or I'm not extroverted. And I think to myself, well, what does that mean exactly? So in this episode, not only do we unpack this subject, but we unfold it and we put it away once and for all. So in this episode, Erich discusses what it means to master networking like an introvert. He talks about the positive and negative side effects of labeling yourself as an introvert during your hiring process. We even spend a little time discussing the superpowers introverts have that they don't even realize that can make them super competitive during an interview and while networking. We talk about what to do when you, as an introvert, begin feeling overwhelmed and exhausted with networking. And we even talk about what that means. Now, his answer to this truly gave me goosebumps. And we even put a spin on things when I asked Erich if he thought of introverts as underrepresented in the workplace. And trust me, you'll love his answer. I did. So here's what you need to know about Erich. Now, he's the owner of Harmony Insights, which is a company that helps coaches, consultants, and organizations benefit from the DISC personality assessment. And as a side note, I have to apologize now because Erich and I go off on a tangent talking about DISC assessments, which I absolutely love. But you should also know that he's the founder of HR Hot Seat, which is an inclusive mastermind community of real HR professionals solving real HR problems. Now, Erich draws from a broad range of experiences as a corporate HR professional, a public speaker, a career coach, a classical musician, and a proud introvert to inspire others toward meaningful work and productive workplace relationships. Today's podcast, you should know, is sponsored by the Offer Magnet Job Seeker Program, which is a career success program for job seekers looking to level up their career. If you're interested in learning how to make your resume stand out, start your job search, interview like a pro, and negotiate that top pay, then join us by visiting JenniferTardy.com. Now, do you know any introverts who need to hear today's podcast? If so, take a screenshot, post it on Instagram, and tag us. We're at Your Career Success, and let us know. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Erich, thank you for being a part of But What About Me? I'm so excited to have you here on this conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I've been looking forward to this. Thanks for having me.
So have I. And what I love about this conversation is that we are talking about something that I don't know that a lot of people are talking about, which is related to introverts with the perspective of careers in the hiring process. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I'm so glad that we're having this is because whenever I'm talking to a client, I'll say something to the effect of, networking is going to be a key part of this strategy. And they'll say, hey, I'm kind of introverted. So we're going to...
It's a disclaimer, right?
Yes. So we're going to unpack all of that in this podcast today. But let me start with the first question. And that's all about what is an introvert exactly?
So introverts are those of us who get our energy from within, that don't need to be in larger groups of people and don't need to look outside of ourselves necessarily for that energy. Actually, that energy that comes from outside of ourselves might be a little overwhelming at times. And I just need to say off the bat that I identify as introverted myself. but I in no way claim to be speaking for all introverts.
Okay.
I have some very passionate opinions on the topic, but a lot of our conversation today is going to come from my perspective, and others like me who have said, yeah, I identify as being introverted, and these are things that I care about. These are some things that I kind of stay away from, and and taking that information and running with it.
Perfect. No, I like that a lot too. And I tell people as well that I am also an introvert. And what's so funny about that is that, I've been leading recruiting teams for a long time. And it never fails that one of my recruiters will say, I can't believe that our leader is an introvert, because they don't expect it. So I think that leads me to, what are some of the misconceptions about introverts?
I would say right off the bat, the first thing that comes to mind is that introverts are shy. That
Okay.
is a misconception, and it is not true. I think it's easy to meet somebody who's introverted and have them be maybe soft-spoken, on the quieter side of things, maybe preferring to take a back seat to wherever the spotlight happens to be. But if you then go to someone who's introverted and saying, well, that also means you're shy or that you're antisocial, that can come across as offensive. Introverts may get their energy from within, but they are just as likely as anybody else to form meaningful relationships with people, enjoy social settings. They're just going to do it in a different way than some of our more extroverted friends are.
And so, I meant to ask you about that too, just in case there are some people who that may not resonate with them, but introverts get their energy from within, and that's what makes them an introvert, which means that an extrovert gets their energy externally. Can you talk a little bit about, can you unpack that a little bit, maybe by comparing the two?
I'm happy to. So, and I will admit things about myself along the way to kind of help paint this picture.
Even better.
But there are several evenings that you could come to me and say, hey, Eric, you have a choice between sitting on the couch, watching your favorite TV show, or reading a book, or connecting deeply with an individual, maybe on a phone conversation, or coming with me to an event where you're not going to know anybody. There's going to be 100 people there. You're going to be expected to be able to make small talk and appear comfortable doing so in the moment. Which of those are you going to choose? As an introvert, 9 times out of 10, maybe 10 times out of 10, I'm going to kick it by myself. I'm gonna read something, or I'm gonna have a great conversation with the single person that I know really well. Something about that larger group, especially with people that I don't know, makes me very anxious. And
Yeah.
it looks like some of this is resonating with you.
Absolutely. Because if you gave me the option, that exact same scenario, you probably noticed that I was like, 100 people networking, you don't. But I think that's the beautiful thing about an introvert. We can, but if we have a choice, we may choose otherwise.
We're perfectly capable, and that's one of the biggest takeaways from this conversation already, is that introverts are perfectly capable of being social, appearing comfortable, and maybe actually be comfortable in a setting like that. But it isn't necessarily going to be a preference. For example, the one that always comes to mind is how you spend your New Year's Eve. Anybody who goes to a hotel ballroom with hundreds of their closest friends to spend New Year's Eve, I can't imagine a worse way to spend it.
That is so true. That is so true. And yes, and sometimes there's that you feel obligated to do something like that, but no, I completely understand, and that does resonate with me. But I love that you said that introverts are perfectly capable. So keeping that theme in mind, that introverts are perfectly capable of doing any of these networking types of opportunities. In our conversation, we talked about mastering networking like an introvert. What does that mean? It sounds almost, most people would think of it and say, that sounds almost like an oxymoron, but let's talk about it.
Right. I had so many. I've been an introvert. I've known so many introverts along the way that say, just, networking isn't for me. It's not something that I do naturally. And my response is always, well, how are you doing it? because there is a way to network for all of us, regardless of where you fall on the personality style spectrum. There's a way to do it that is very genuine and authentic and enjoyable and fruitful. I think too often people are trying to do it in a way that does not suit who they are and what their strengths are. So in speaking, and I'm speaking at the SHRM conference coming up in Las Vegas in June,
Awesome.
I really wanted to take as my message, not just, hey, all personality styles can network, but that all personality styles have something to learn from introverts in the way that they naturally network, in the way that we naturally want to connect with other people, that there really is sort of a superpower there that I think goes unrecognized, including by the very people who bring that power to the conversation.
Okay, and one of the questions that I am going to ask you about is about that superpower. So I can't wait to get there. But I do want to ask a little bit about labels, right? And I often find that by the time a client comes to me, and let's say that they're an introvert, they already carry with them a label. I'm sorry. They already carry with them a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And, or in other words, they've labeled themselves in a certain way. How can this label negatively affect a job search if you're an introvert?
Well, I like that you use the word label and narrative, because there's both there, and quite often the label is placed on themselves. The label is almost like we joked earlier about there being a disclaimer. FYI, I'm introverted. Like you want to start out.
Yes.
Like,
just so you know.
You should know about me, as if there's something wrong with that. And people really need to sort of change their perspective on how that's actually working for them. Your question had to do with the potential for it to negatively impact your career and often your job search, which is related to your career. I think that there's sometimes a natural anxiety that introverts bring to social situations of any sort. A concern that, am I going to be perceived in the way that I intend to be perceived? Am I going to want to and be capable of making small talk? Am I going to have just a comfort level in our conversation, regardless of what we're talking about, even if it's something that's very near and dear to me? The fact that I don't yet know you, you don't yet know me, is that something that I'm going to be okay with? I think there's a lot of second guessing, and there's a lot of jumping to the conclusion that simply because a particular environment might not be my preference, that I can't excel in that environment. Mm-hmm. And so quite often I'm encouraging a certain level of introspection, to sit down and come up with a list, actually write out a list of the things that you do well, of the strengths that you bring to a conversation, the things about other people that really interest you. And remind yourself that there are so many positives on that list, and that this disclaimer that you bring to conversations and to careers, etc., probably has no place in the discussion. If anything, it's doing you a disservice.
Okay, all right. And what's interesting is that there was something that you said before that allows me to flip this question around, meaning, are there any, so let's say, again, that my narrative or the way that I'm labeling myself as an introvert, let's say I see it as a positive, or, I'm carrying this narrative, but it's in an extremely positive way. One example that you gave before that really sticks out to me is how you prefer one-on-one conversations, interpersonal conversations. That can be a huge plus, especially if when you're interviewing, it's on a one-on-one basis. Are there any other pluses or bonuses that a person who sees themselves as an introvert kind of like be able to boast about that can help them in the hiring process?
So in addition to connecting with people one-on-one individually, I think a strength of mine, something that I like to wear on my sleeve, is the fact that I feel like I'm a good listener. That I am.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
That I may, and on occasion, be distracted by things that I'm excited to contribute to our conversation, but that I really want to hear what you have to say. And active listening is something that you have to demonstrate in a number of ways, not only in your nonverbal communication, but in the meaningful follow-up questions that you ask. You know, that I'm willing and interested in learning closely enough to what you're saying to further our conversation in some way that keeps the spotlight on you. You know, that allows you to feel special in some way. One of the things that I love that I've heard along the way is that you should treat everyone that you meet as though they have a sign above their head that says, "Make me feel special."
I like that.
As an introvert, I feel like I can do that well. I don't want the attention. Let's talk
Yes.
about you. You know, what can I ask you and dig more deeply into and be genuinely curious and inquisitive about, that will have you feel special in some way. Not because I'm trying to be manipulative, you know, or disingenuine in any sort of way, but as an introvert, I may be very naturally curious about any number of things that you're saying.
Which completely aligns to one of the things that I always tell my participants, my students, my clients is when you are in an interview, it is a two-way conversation. It's not, you come to the interview and they're asking you all of the questions. Be curious, be inquisitive, ask those questions. And what better way than for someone who sees himself as an introvert to say, okay, I'm just going to approach it with curiosity. I'm not going to sit here and try and think of what are the best 3 questions that I can ask during an interview. I'm just going to be inquisitive. I like that. I like it a lot.
I think it's good to have something scripted, and in the sense that you go in sort of armed with, okay, if there's a lull in conversation,
Yeah.
what could I ask? And then being intentional about those questions. For example, one of my favorites, not what do you do, but why do you do what you do?
Mm.
Too many people start with a scripted question, and so they get a scripted answer, and you know it's going to be scripted because the person says, yeah, well, as soon as they start with yeah, well, or yeah, so, you know whatever comes next is something they've said a million times. Instead, if you ask somebody, you know what, tell me, why is it that you do the work that you do? They're going to stop. They're going to look at you in a different way. They're going to really think about their response. Now, suddenly, you've asked a very meaningful question that is not so scripted.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever comes next is going to be so much more interesting that you can really dig into and have a meaningful dialogue about.
Okay. Okay. And I like that because it leads me to my next question on why are we talking about this conversation together? And so let me even take it a step back because you are a guru in teaching DISC. And whenever I run across someone else who knows how to teach DISC, and I know by far you have, way more experience in teaching DISC than I do. And so DISC is all about behaviors. And how did teaching that subject, that expertise, lead you to having such an interest in sort of being a spokesperson to inspire those who are introverted?
I mean, so much of this comes out of a lifetime of introspection for me. I was a psychology major, a philosophy minor. I'm a thinker.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I have spent far too much time in my own head. And a lot of my life has been spent questioning who I am and why I do the things that I do. And I was naturally drawn to DISC in a former corporate HR role and loved it so much that I left that role after 16 years to build a company around the DISC personality assessment because I enjoy it that much. That is one of the nerdiest things that I could possibly say.
No, but I love DISC just as much. So we're sitting here like, yes, DISC. And everyone else is going to get that love for DISC. But anyway, I've seen how powerful it can be when you're trying to make sure that teams know and understand why people behave the way that they do. Yeah.
Right, because it answered so many of those questions for not only me and how I do things, but for teams. I started to think more about it and consider, okay, since we're talking about natural communication styles and personality styles, how does this entire conversation about introversion, extroversion, and ambiversion, kind of fit in? I personally feel that you naturally identify with one or another. I'm still torn about what I think about the whole ambivert term, where you're equally comfortable in both worlds. I think it's possible, but I would argue that we're naturally drawn to one or another end of the spectrum. But I thought, okay, there's value in networking. I need to do more of it since I'm growing my own small business.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't yet feel comfortable doing it, even though I spend my days talking about personality and communication styles. So I made an effort to surround myself by people who were asking similar questions and putting myself out there as someone who wants to speak on the topic, but more selfishly, I wanted to speak on the topic so I could be surrounded by people who were also trying to figure out what I was trying to figure out.
Ah, no, that's really good though. And they said, because you know that old adage that if you want to learn, teach.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the best ways to learn something by teaching it to others because you're diving into so many different facets of it. Okay, so I'm going to derail this conversation for a second just because I'm because I'm curious. Okay, so DISC, and we'll talk a little bit more, or we'll put more information about DISC below in case people want to contact you for that. But so I am a big old D. I'm a high D in DISC, right? And I also have a business partner who is a very high C. Can you imagine? Can you imagine like our working style together? And because she hasn't done DISC before, I explained to her this is a great working relationship because I'm the person, I'm the executor, I get it done.
Uh-huh.
She ensures it's done correctly
Uh-huh. And
all the
there's room
time.
for both. Both are needed.
Correct, correct. And so the people that we bring onto the team, we find that they are, you know, more of the S's and more of the I's because that's important to balance us all out. But my question is, what are you?
So I'm a very high C.
Okay.
My
That's
joke,
awesome.
my joke tends to be I'm a high C with just enough S to make me socially acceptable. And I say that completely
I get it.
because that high C style is often so focused on standards and rules and regulation. And
Yes.
actually, there's a correlation there with introversion as well. So C's tend to be a little bit more introverted. So if
I
they're not
didn't know
careful,
that.
they might stick to themselves, you know, um, and be so caught up in things being correct and right and wrong that um, they don't they're not perceived as socially graceful. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. So they have to be more intentional about making sure that they connect with others. Uh-huh.
So as a C, then I have to make sure that on occasion, for example, in my corporate HR job, that I came out of my cube once in a while, that I, you know, made a point to connect with people, you know, that I brought some additional personality to conversations that naturally may have been difficult for me, you know, or
Yeah.
and it's that intentionality. That's such a big word. Is
Mhm.
being thoughtful about what you do bring to relationships and conversations, whatever your disc or other personality style happens to be, and give some thought to: is that working to my advantage? You know, is it working to my disadvantage in any way? And being intentional then about um, how you
Balance.
grow and how you connect and how you balance your priorities and your values.
And I tell people too, it what's important to you? Like what is it that you want? If where you are is exactly what you want, maybe it doesn't require you stepping out of your shell. Maybe it doesn't require you being intentional about leaving the cubicle to talk to other people. But what if that want, that desire of yours is more, then you're going to have to be more intentional. You're going to have to, you know, step outside of your comfort zone to try new things. Yep.
The way I put it is there are some people who will look behind them and see a wake of, you know, or in their wake, just a sea of relationships that didn't work for one reason or another, and they won't care. You know, they'll say, you know what, it's gotten me this far, and how I connect with people is how I connect with people, and, you know, I'm good with that. And there are other people that are going to look back and say, you know what, I could have been more effective in those relationships. I could have
Yeah.
led better, or I could have sold more effectively, or I could have just connected on some fundamental level better with some of these people than I have. What can I do going forward um, to encourage those connections? You know, to step outside of my comfort zone, to look at relationships differently, to approach them differently, and see how that works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. And so when people are saying, so let's just say job seekers, when they are saying networking isn't for me, Like, what are they really trying to say? Or why are introverts feeling like networking just isn't for them?
I think anybody who says that, regardless of personality style, is saying, I have this idea in mind of a stereotypical networking event, and I have
Yes.
no interest in that. You know, that it's sort of like a sketchy, sort of salesy, I need to sell myself in a way that I'm not comfortable doing. I don't even like the word sales. Um, and it seems very disingenuous and manipulative and just kind of all of the things that I don't want a relationship to be.
Mm.
And I have no interest in going near any of that. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't either. If you're trying to network the way that other people do, or in a way that in your head you feel networking has to be done, I don't see any reason to do it at that point.
So ultimately, watch what you're saying to yourself about what an upcoming event is going to be or look like.
Yeah, there's some of it is the assumptions that we make.
Yeah.
A large part of it, though, I think, is realizing that you can network in whatever way is most natural and comfortable for you. If you really expect it and want it to be a fruitful, enjoyable experience, which it can be, I think the only way to experience that is to do it in a way that you uniquely want to do it.
Okay, so that leads me into my next question. So if most people will say if you're an introvert, the best way to network or master networking is to go out there and just do it. Okay, but we're not going to give that advice today. What are some actionable steps that people can take today if they want to master networking like an introvert? So let's finish what you were saying before and let's go with that.
Yeah. So I think first is to be introspective and recognize that you're going to do it in a way that other people aren't necessarily going to do it. You are going to bring strengths and preferences to a conversation that nobody else will. Um, and there's a lot kind of wrapped up in that. The process of self-reflection and introspection is kind of a meaty one, but I think it's worth engaging in, especially for those of us who are introverted. The challenge is not to become so paralyzed by that you never actually get out and meet people. That you become so introspective and so inwardly focused that you become self-conscious about, or overly self-conscious about how you're perceived by other people. So yes, you'll often hear just do it. I would say start with reasonable expectations.
Okay.
If you're trying to network like other people are, and maybe your model of how to network is that extroverted friend of yours, maybe that person is comfortable having 30 different conversations at an event and leaving with 30 different business cards. I would forget who everybody is. I would know what to do with the business cards.
Right,
So
exactly.
for me, somebody who spends the first 30 seconds of any networking event planning my escape route, I have to say, what is a reasonable goal for me? And it's not 30 conversations. It's one.
Hmm.
And so initially I had to say, if I, as someone who identifies as being introverted, can have one meaningful conversation, something that I do well, and by the way, that conversation is going to take place in the corner of the room,
Uh-huh.
away from the hustle and bustle of the crowd. It may take place actually early in the event or late in the event, before people have arrived or after people have started to leave, so that I feel I have a little bit more space. But if I can have a single conversation, not only am I going to want to stay, I'm not going to want to escape, but odds are that one conversation is going to lead to a second, maybe to a third, and I will be so glad that I attended the event to begin with.
Yeah.
But having reasonable goals that start with a single meaningful conversation really changes your perspective on what networking can be.
Yeah. That makes sense. I've also mentioned to some clients to find out who's going to be at this event. And maybe that goal, just, adding on top of what you were saying, maybe that goal is, oh, I want to talk to this person. And so being able to, even if you don't know who they are, a part of that networking is, hey, have you met such and such yet? Are they here? Starting that conversation. And then you'll eventually find your way to that person, have a conversation with them. So even knowing before you go in that your goal before the end of the day is to find this person, to connect with that person. And then go home.
And then go home.
Uh-huh.
I'm so glad you used the word connect. I put on Facebook recently a few questions as I'm preparing for the SHRM conference in Vegas this summer.
Yeah.
I put on there, and I took some notes here, so I apologize for looking down, but
Sure.
what are some of the words what is the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word networking? That's one of the questions I put out on LinkedIn just to see what people would say.
Okay.
And I got a lot of very positive things. People would say, connect, which is a word you just used, which I love that one. Authenticity, giving, collaboration, success, purpose. I hope that they truly, genuinely believe that these things can come from networking, and that really is the first word that comes to mind, because that is the goal. But I also got hard, selling yourself, awkward, anxiety, right? So then my goal then becomes, how do we take that perception of your experience of networking and reframe it so that the first word that comes to mind when I mention the word networking is connection, the word that you use. That really is the goal. The goal isn't to sell myself. If you go into a networking event and that's your objective, you're doomed from the beginning.
That's true.
Your goal is to connect, and your goal is to serve. And so when I'm speaking about networking, especially with introverts, one of the first things that I mention is that it requires a change in perspective. That you are not networking to be served. You are networking to serve other people. And there's something that Zig Ziglar and other people have talked about, the universal law of reciprocity, where if you help enough other people get what they want, you will get what you want.
Yeah.
So you may be in an event to get a job, to make a connection that's going to be valuable to you in some way, to who knows what your needs are at that event. If you help enough other people get what they want, not only will you be endeared to them in a way that's going to be beneficial to you, but with time, you will get what you came to that event for.
I really like that. And it just never fails to amaze me how all of the greatest keys to success, it all starts with our mindset, how we perceive something, how we approach something. Like our mind is where it all starts. And you just said you can either look at it this way, what can I get? Or you can look at it this way, how can I serve? And even just that notion of how can I be of service to you is something that I've started doing, since I've been an entrepreneur. Like when I meet a new person and we have that introductory networking call, the ones that we all know and love. But before I end that conversation, I'll say, how can I be of service to you?
Love that.
And we'll start that way. And then they'll say, well, how can I be of service to you too? I don't really know yet, but we'll figure some things out along the way. Mm-hmm.
You don't have to know, and that takes a lot of the pressure off of it. No one's expecting that you know how to serve them, but you won't know until you do ask. One of my favorite books is How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yes.
I mean, it's a classic. But that book is full of tips and strategies and suggestions about how to truly connect with other people. And it's not about starting a conversation with, hey, it's really nice to meet you. Let me tell you 10 or 15 minutes about what I do. It's instead, tell me about what you do. Oh, that's interesting. Tell me more about this piece. And give me an example of what you're talking about here so I can better understand it. And really truly being curious and inquisitive in a way that I think comes so naturally to folks who identify with being a little bit more introverted.
Okay. Now, so going back to the whole notion of we as introverts get our energy from within. If we are saying yes, say that again.
About something.
Because I already know where I'm headed with this question. So if we know that we get our energy from within, and now we're saying yes to these networking opportunities, which can take a lot of energy, right? Which is why we have to go within to get that energy. What do you recommend to overcome overwhelm, burnout, exhaustion as an introvert who's in a networking space, especially as consistently as you have to stay networking during your job search?
Yeah. As soon as you use the words overwhelm and burnout, that implies to me that you're stepping outside of your comfort zone and for an extended period of time. There's a lot of, in the DISC terms, that you are adapting. And we can all adapt over the short term, but if we adapt to styles that don't come as naturally to us, and communication styles especially, over the long term, that adapting can lead to what you're talking about: burnout, exhaustion, etc. And honestly, you just get to the point where you want to throw in the towel and say it's not worth it. That it just takes me so far outside of my comfort zone that I don't know that this is something, how can I move to an island somewhere where I don't have to be employed? And, so I think the first question is then, as we talked about earlier, identifying what does come naturally to you. What are the natural strengths and preferences that you bring to networking that will allow you to some extent, stay within your comfort zone? And I don't want to say that as an absolute, because there are benefits to stepping outside of it. One of my favorite quotes is, anything worthwhile that's going to happen to you in life is going to happen just beyond the edge of your comfort zone.
That's right.
And so I, especially with DISC, I'm talking with teams about that regularly, but I think that there's something to be said for identifying what are the things that I do well, what are those environments that will allow me to do my best work and make the most worthwhile connections.
So you gave me goosebumps when you were saying a second ago that if you're too far out there for too long, you're really trying to adapt. So it sounds like you're saying that you're almost trying to live in a space of someone that you're not, right? And so is it, rather than adapting, what would be the other word? Is it, just staying connected to your natural strengths, or is there something better?
Well, so for example, we'll come up with an example. So say beyond a shadow of a doubt that being in a room with a whole bunch of people that you don't know is not where you shine.
Nope.
Right?
Unless it's my job.
Unless
yes. Yes.
Right. So I, a self-proclaimed network introvert, I have an HR mastermind where I'm bringing once a month 80 to 100 people together in a room to do the very thing that scares me most. Right?
Okay.
Now, when it comes to adapting, I could, in any given event, I could meet you and say, so I'm so glad we had the opportunity to connect here. Let's spend the next 45 minutes talking in a room where we can't hear each other, where we feel like we have to meet other people, our attention is being pulled in different directions. That would be, for me, 45 minutes of adapting. Right? In an environment that doesn't come as naturally to me. What I could do instead is say, this really has been, I'm so glad we've had the opportunity to meet. And you know what? This isn't really the best environment for me to have the kind of conversation that I would like to have with you, because I'd really like to learn more about the work that you do, ask you some questions about that. I know we've only had a few minutes, but would you mind if we pick this up on the phone later this week, or face-to-face, if we kind of sat down for coffee in a place that's a little bit less hectic?
Yeah.
And who knows if you'll be okay with that, but that's a way that I can be very honest and genuine and authentic about the fact that, maybe a room full of strangers is not the place where I'm going to have my best conversations.
So instead of putting all that pressure on yourself to have the best conversations in a space that may not be your preference, just focus on connecting there, but moving that conversation offline. That's genius.
I know.
And that is how you master networking as an introvert. We should just drop the mic right now. I love that. That is awesome.
So
focus on moving the conversation.
Yeah, that's one example. And it's just being upfront about, hey, you know what? This isn't entirely comfortable for me. Let's have this conversation in an environment that is, because it's going to go so much better.
Yeah, right, exactly. Okay, so we talked before about a superpower. You had mentioned that a little bit earlier. So my question is there a superpower to being an introvert in general while you're on your career search?
For your career search specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're in the job search.
Yeah. Is there a superpower that I just don't know that I have because I see myself as an introvert while I'm looking for a job?
Okay. Well, this is one of the things that I love recommending. I do some career coaching as well, and recommending to my clients who are a little more on the introverted side.
Okay.
We're always wanting to make a good impression in their interviews. And you hear all the time to ask questions, right? You should always have questions prepared. But too often, the questions that are prepared are things that you could find out on a company's website.
True.
How many employees do you have here? What sort of benefits do you offer? Stuff that is either already available or is just sort of awkwardly placed in the conversation. I think that introverts can be very naturally analytical about things, very thoughtful in terms of the questions that they ask, and I think that is a superpower right off the bat. So one of the questions that I recommend people asking that really, regardless of your personality style, I think makes the most positive impression you can make is something along the lines of, however early, by the way, in a conversation this comes up, what is something that you and your company are challenged by currently that you see me as being able to help with? I don't have to be, that sends a number of different messages. Number one, it says, you don't have to hire me and I'm already going to try to be of service to you. You don't have to have me on payroll.
Yeah.
Two, I'm thinking about you. I'm not just thinking about myself. Yes, I need a job, but I'm thinking about what your headaches are. Three, it puts me in a position, if I ask that question early enough on, that in part two of our conversation, where you expect that I'm going to come in, asking about salary and benefits and what am I getting out of this, since I already established that you want me as a candidate, right, as an employee. Instead, I say, by the way, before we even get into our second conversation, you said when we talked last time that you were challenged by these things. In the time that has passed since then, I've given that some thought. What do you think about these ideas?
I love it. Position yourself as a solution. If you can position yourself as a solution to their biggest challenge, my friend, you are going to be very competitive in that job search. And so I love the connection. Being an introvert, being inquisitive, listening, putting all that together, and then positioning yourself by asking them about the challenge and showing how you're the solution. Whoever listens to this, if they apply it, that is a very good tool.
But instead, our natural tendency is to show up and pitch with what we know best, which is ourselves, because you hear all this advice about go in knowing your strengths and the value you bring, and you do need to know those things. I'm not taking that off the table. But if you jump into the conversation saying, well, I can do this for you and I can do that for you, without first understanding what they need and what their challenge is. Early on when I started my business, Harmony Insights, my pitch was, hey, I do DISC. You need to bring me in as a DISC facilitator. And they would say, okay, slow your roll for a second. First of all, we don't know what DISC is. We've never heard of you. I don't know what Harmony Insights is. And you have no idea what our headaches are. You don't know what challenges we're facing.
Right.
So as an entrepreneur, as a small business owner, we learned that early on. You have to lead with, asking what people's challenges are. But in your job search, if you bring that same approach, that same mentality, you are going to knock people's socks off, because I guarantee the other candidates that they're considering, your competition, they are not leading with that question.
Nope, they're not. They're definitely not. Okay, so as a part of But What About Me, we always talk about how we like to talk about topics that affect historically underrepresented populations. Mm-hmm. Now, there's also a different way of just thinking about underrepresentation in the workplace in general. Mm-hmm. Do you think that introverts are perhaps underrepresented in the workplace? I wonder though, and if they are, is it because they're adapting?
It depends on what you mean by underrepresented. So do you mean that there are fewer of them, or their voice is not being heard?
It's actually, when I'm talking about underrepresented, it's that they're available in the population to work, but there are fewer in the workplace that are being represented. Yeah, which also connects to the voice too. But when you're thinking about introverts in general, that's a whole nother topic related to having a voice.
Yes.
But go ahead.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. I wouldn't say, and I don't have any science to back this up, I wouldn't say they're underrepresented in the workplace in terms of percentages. Mm-hmm. I think that we're in the mix just like anybody else is. What I would argue, if there's any challenge at all, it's that we are having our voice heard. That we are not only there, but but we are being very confident and upfront about the strengths that we bring to the workplace, the value that we bring to organizations, that we are requesting, demanding at times a voice when we wouldn't otherwise have one, because maybe our tendency is maybe to not speak up, because we may be thinking before we speak. Well, in the meantime, the train has passed by and we haven't gotten on it necessarily because we're still formulating our opinion, maybe. That we are, those of us in a position to influence leaders, that we're saying to those leaders, you have introverts in your mix. What are you doing to invite them into the conversation, to solicit their feedback, to encourage them to speak up and to participate and to contribute in ways that they might not naturally do so otherwise? And I know I'm sort of generalizing here, and I don't want anyone to take offense to say, well, I see myself as introverted, but I also contribute and participate. I don't want to say that all introverts are inclined that way, but I think that there is a tendency for us to kind of sit back and watch things unfold to see how we can participate and contribute our best. In the meantime, then we lose the opportunity at times to be fully involved in that dialogue.
When you think about someone who's introverted in the workplace, do you see it as the responsibility of the leadership team to really pull them into the conversation, or do you see it more of the responsibility of that employee to push themselves and to push their way into the conversation? Or what is your thought on that?
That's a great question. I almost always side on, or start with, that it's the responsibility of us as individuals to take up whatever space we wish to take up in the workplace.
I like that. Mm-hmm.
All of the while, of course, encouraging leaders to solicit input and feedback and involvement from those people on their teams who may be less inclined to participate. I think where the asterisk that I put on that, and I don't have this idea fully developed, which is such an introverted thing to say, by the way.
I'm going to start using that. I'll just say, I haven't really figured out the best way to articulate yet.
Because it's my disclaimer that says whatever comes next isn't fully baked. So
Exactly.
I think it's easy to say, yes, you should take it upon yourself to take the space that you want to take up and contribute in the way that you want to contribute. But I also know that there are some very real examples of societal, whatever you want to call it, obstacles, roadblocks, etc., that keep people from participating in the way that they know that they're fully capable of participating. And so it's not just enough to say to somebody, hey, say what you want to say, do what you want to do, speak up when you want to speak up, because society doesn't necessarily work that way. All of that being said, and that's probably a topic for another day, I continue to come back to, you're not going to have much to say to begin with if you haven't done that introspection to understand what you bring to the table, what your value is, what you have to say. So I really do, in almost all cases, start with, if you were to have a voice, what would that voice be?
Yeah.
If you want to pursue meaningful work, have you defined what meaningful work looks like to you? Have you defined what value you bring, and are you able to articulate that value? You can't expect leaders to call you in. You can't expect to be hired. You can't expect anybody else to involve you in the conversation if you don't first show up with the confidence of who you are and what you have to contribute.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Know yourself first. Know thyself first.
There you go.
Now, who are some well-known, super successful introverts that we may not even think of them as introverts? Or
I'm sure there's a whole slew, and I probably should do some more research into this. I get so caught up in talking to the person on the other side of the video camera that I'm less concerned about those in the public eye.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first names that comes to mind, though, is Bill Gates.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
and probably his wife, too. Or do you think
Melinda? I don't know.
You think Melinda's more of an extra? Yeah, because she does speak more for him.
Maybe, and I certainly don't know either of them intimately. I only know of them what I've seen in the media. But you might see him and say, oh yeah, but he's regularly in front of thousands of people and hundreds of thousands of people. And, how could he possibly be uncomfortable in the limelight or, not get energy from that sort of environment? But if you really pay attention to his demeanor, he doesn't come across as the life of the party. He's not really big on stage and gregarious and all of these things that we sort of ascribe to extroversion.
Yeah.
Instead, he may be in front of an audience of thousands of people, but you get the sense that he's talking with individuals. That his energy is coming from a very different place.
Okay.
So he's the first example that comes to mind, but I think the disclaimer there is that you really shouldn't judge somebody based on the environment in which you see them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will get up in front of a group full of, a group of however many people, 50, 100 people, to do a disc workshop on the higher end of things. And at the end of it, people have seen me apparently comfortable in the spotlight, talking on and on about something that I'm passionate about, getting really excited about it. And so they assume,
there's no way.
Erich is extroverted.
Yes. There's no way he's an introvert.
You invite me out for drinks now, I may go to, get to know you better. But if given a choice, I need to go sit in my car for 20 minutes to fully, re-energize and just have some time to myself.
Right. That is the key piece of it, because I need to go away, get more energy, and then I'll re-enter. Yeah. I remember, I think it was last year around October, I went to see Brendon Burchard. Have you heard of Brendon Burchard?
I've not seen him.
He wrote the book, High Performance Habits, but he is he's like this huge speaker around high performance habits and, getting your personal life and your professional life, becoming a speaker, getting all of it right. So he speaks in front of thousands of people all of the time. And he's so high energy and all of this other stuff. And he was on stage and he actually mentioned he's an introvert. And everyone was like, whoa, you're not an introvert. I mean, his energy just takes my energy.
Yeah.
Just watching him on stage. But when he said that he's an introvert, if he and his wife went to a party, he'd be the one in the corner sitting down, probably not saying a lot to a lot of people. He's an introvert.
My guess is what you see him doing is adapting, and it's the same thing that I do. It's the same. I can turn it on and I can be effective and I can be compelling in the moment in the way that someone who's more extroverted might be. But again, what is my natural tendency? I'm going to default to, my wife is a first grade teacher. I work with adults all day. At the end of the day, we come home, we sit side by side on the couch and we don't talk for 10 minutes.
That sounds like heaven.
Yeah, right. And then we'll share what had gone on in our day, but it's sometimes it's, unless of course I've been sitting by myself all day at my computer and she comes home and I want to talk her ear off and she's like,
wait. So this has been such a great conversation. I mean, I think that we really unpacked this whole notion of being an introvert and carrying that narrative and what people can do to become a master at networking like an introvert. There's just so many good things about being an introvert. Thank you for calling that out in today's conversation. I'm wondering though, as a last part of this, is there anything that I didn't ask you or that you'd like to share in closing to that person who may be sitting back and listening, saying, but what about me? What would be that thing that you would say to that person? No pressure.
One of my favorite memes that I've seen says, introverts unite, but just separately and in your own homes. Right?
That is so awesome. It
sounds attractive to me.
Yes.
So what comes out of that is, number one, there's value in the work that you're going to do on your own, the introspection, right? And kind of having time to yourself to consider who are you and what are you going to bring to networking relationships, so that when you begin connecting with people, you're doing so in a way that is authentic and genuine and fruitful and enjoyable. But there's also value in community. And if you deny yourself the opportunity to get together with other like-minded folks and learn from one another and push one another, hold each other accountable and grow together, I think you're missing out on a really important piece of the puzzle. So when it comes to networking, being service-minded, wanting to serve other people, keeping in mind that you control where the spotlight is pointing. So if you don't want it pointed on you, you can shine it on somebody else. And quite often that is going to be the most effective way for you to network. But whatever it takes, find that community, and bring to that community a certain pride and confidence in your natural strengths and talents and the things that really do define you as introverted, that there's a need for that and there's value in that. And it's something that we should all be very confident about.
Wonderful. What a great message. And thank you for sharing that too. And you've mentioned that you're speaking at an upcoming SHRM conference. What other, in addition to that, are you speaking at any other events, or what are you up to over there? Let's just throw that question out there.
Well, obviously, as we talked about earlier, I do a number of DISC workshops for companies who want teams that really appreciate the value of diverse personality styles.
Yeah.
I'm speaking where I can to groups of HR professionals and others who want to talk more about effective networking for all communication styles. And I have, I mentioned earlier on, HR Hot Seat, which is a mastermind that I started a couple of years ago that is up over 1,800 members in 5 different chapters.
Wow.
And I facilitate our downtown Chicago chapter, and we come together once a month for free. HR professionals sort of broadly defined. We have coaches and learning and development and payroll and benefits and just all sorts of people to have mastermind style problem-solving conversations, to get together and talk about some tactical stuff, but also say, you know what, the work of HR can be difficult at times. Maybe I'm employed, maybe I'm not employed, but let's come together and support one another in this process.
Okay.
So
HR Hot Seat.
Yeah, people can learn more about that on hrhotseat.com, but it's we just have some fantastic conversations.
And we'll make sure that the links to where they can find you or anything that you've been talking about, we'll make sure that we'll put it in the details section below as well too. Not a problem at all. So we are going to wrap this up the same way I do with any of my other guests, where I ask some flash questions. And so here's how this game works. I'll ask 3 questions and you tell me the first thing that comes to mind for you. Okay. All right. So question number 1, it's never too late to
know yourself.
I like it. Number 2, I get inspired by
other people's passions.
Okay. And last, career success means?
Oh, that's a tough one. Career success means doing something that you find uniquely rewarding and fulfilling.
Awesome. Thank you for being on this show, Erich.
Thank you, Jennifer. I really appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Be sure to tune in next week because we have so much more in store for you. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, and keep glowing.